COVID-19 being talked about all the time, but what's it actually caused by? It's caused by a virus called SARS coronavirus 2, and that's shown here in this picture. And the name coronavirus doesn't come from the beer. Instead, it comes from this crown-like appearance that the virus first showed when it was looked at under a microscope. And crown is the Spanish, or I guess Latin word for, corona is the Latin or Spanish word for crown, and that hence the name. So this crown is given by these spike proteins on the virus. So to give you an idea of what the virus actually is, it's very, very tiny. It's about 100 nanometers in size. And that spike protein is essentially what the virus uses to get inside our cells. So then once the virus is in, then it starts to make more copies of itself. It essentially reproduces. But then in order to go and infect more cells, the virus has to get out of that cell to start with. And that release step is really important. And sometimes with some viruses, they'll actually kill the cell they're in to sort of burst out, but other ones sort of adapt cellular machinery in order for to just sort of slowly leave the cell while keeping the cell alive as a kind of viral factory. We also know now that even if you recover from COVID, you can actually have long COVID symptoms. And this can range from having shortness of breath and ongoing chest pain to increased fatigue and chronic fatigue, essentially. And we're starting to think that even chronic fatigue syndrome might be actually due to sort of previous viral infections that we've never really understood before. So we don't really understand what's causing long COVID yet, and that also means we don't really know how to treat it yet. Getting a vaccine rollout to everyone is difficult. And it's even if there's an emerging pandemic, it takes time to make a vaccine. And actually, we were incredibly lucky that we were able to make vaccines as quickly as we could. We also, always have concerns about how well vaccines are going to work against variants. I want to assure you right now that all the vaccines are working really well against the Delta variant as well. Our vaccines will protect you from hospitalization and death with COVID. You might still get infected, you might still get some mild symptoms, but compared to what COVID can do, that's really, really a huge improvement and definitely worth it. All of these vaccines are pretty much 100% effective at keeping you out of hospital and stopping you dying from COVID. So essentially what these vaccines are doing are defanging this virus so that, instead of ending up in hospital dying from COVID, we might just have a mild cold. So I would say that any vaccine is a good vaccine, particularly in an outbreak scenario like we're experiencing now. We notice this phenomenon of children not being so susceptible to the original strains of COVID, but it looks like this Delta variant is hitting children more commonly. So there could be a couple of explanations for this. It could be down to the immune system of children just being actually a bit sort of fitter and a bit better at fighting off COVID than our adult or sort of older immune systems. So it could be that. And the reason that Delta is kind of overcoming that is because Delta is actually up to about 1,000 times more transmissible. So that head start that those children had with their immune system has now been sort of caught up to by the virus. Another thing is when we're looking at the spread, we have to remember that actually a lot of our older population have now been vaccinated. So that skews our interpretation of the data somewhat. So when you look at overall at how the numbers, no longer are all the cases happening in older people because they've been vaccinated. So it does skew the data more towards children. But what we have to keep in mind is that, yes, definitely children are potentially more susceptible to Delta. And so we have to both protect the children and we have to protect children from potentially transmitting it on to vulnerable older people that they're in contact with. And certainly there are concerns about testing vaccines and drugs in children. And certainly when the vaccines were originally tested, they weren't tested in any under 18-year-olds. Partially this was because under 18-year-olds were at less risk of developing severe COVID anyway, so the need to test them in children was far, far smaller. And ideally, no one wants to test it in children if that's possible. once it's been shown to be safe and effective in adults, then we're much more confident to move into children and to test the importance of these vaccines in children. But so far, all the data has been that they've been safe and effective, and it's definitely the benefit of getting vaccinated far outweighs the risk and the detrimental effect of catching COVID, whether you're old or whether you're young.